Welcome to Life Stories, where real experiences bring powerful lessons and profound moments. Today, we dive into a journey of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph. A woman who was abandoned by her own family at 18 returns after 14 years. Not as the broken girl they once discarded, but as someone they never saw coming. What happens when the truth comes crashing down? Get ready for a story of empowerment and revenge that will leave you reflecting on life's deepest lessons. Subscribe to our channel to start today's story. You won't want to miss it. It's strange, isn't it? How life can twist and turn. Sometimes in the most unexpected of ways. I never thought I'd see my family again. At 18, I was cast aside like a forgotten thing. My name wiped from their lips. My presence erased from their memories. I was left with nothing but the sting of their words and the echo of their rejection. And yet, here I am, 14 years later, standing at the entrance of an opulent ballroom, dressed in a sleek black gown, my hair styled into an elegant updo. I wasn't supposed to be here. People like me, discarded, forgotten, never showed up to weddings like this. But somehow, I was. The air in the ballroom was thick with money and pretense. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a golden glow, while polished silverware and champagne flutes gleamed under the dimmed lights. The sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and murmurs of approval filled the room. Everything about this place screamed wealth, power, and status. This was the kind of event where people like me, people who had been thrown away, weren't supposed to exist. Yet, here I stood, and then, I saw them, my family. My mother, still as cold and unyielding as ever, her sharp gaze sweeping over the crowd as she sipped her champagne. Oblivious to the fact that her past had just walked through the door. My father, pretending he didn't see me, though the twitch in his jaw betrayed his composure. And there was Sarah, my sister, the golden child, always the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. She looked me up and down with an expression twisted between confusion and irritation. As if my mere presence was some kind of scandal. I stood there, letting the moment sink in. Watching them, but not with the anger I had once carried. No, this wasn't about revenge. This was something else. Something far more satisfying than any simple act of vengeance. This was about making them see the truth. About showing them that I wasn't the same girl they had thrown out all those years ago. Sarah, of course, was the first to speak. She crossed her arms and curled her lips in a mockery of a smile. "You're not on the guest list," she sneered. I could feel the contempt in her voice. And yet, I remained calm, unaffected. They had always believed they were above me. That I was nothing. That I was a burden. A waste of time and money. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Before I could respond, her fiancé, a man I had never met, stepped forward, about to throw me out. When something in his expression changed. His face drained of color. His eyes widening in recognition. He froze, his voice breaking as he said, "Wait, this woman is..." The rest of his words faltered. And for the first time in 14 years, I saw a flicker of recognition. A hint of fear, in the eyes of someone who had once been part of my life. I smiled slowly, letting the moment build. "Do you really not know who I am?" I asked, my voice calm and measured. He stood there, speechless, struggling to place me. I could see the realization creeping up behind his eyes. I had known from the moment I walked in that they wouldn't recognize me. That they would look at me as if I were still the same helpless, discarded girl they had thrown away. But I wasn't that girl anymore. The woman they saw before them was someone they had no right to know. Someone who had risen from the ashes of their cruelty to build a life they couldn't even begin to imagine. I wasn't here to beg for acceptance. I wasn't here to be humiliated. I was here to show them exactly who I had become. And I was going to do it with quiet strength, not anger. As I stood there, the weight of their stares on me, I let my gaze sweep over the room. There was my mother, still glaring at me with that same icy, judgmental look. There was Sarah, smirking, trying to hold onto her golden image. Though I could see the unease in her eyes now. They were all expecting me to crumble. Expecting me to beg for forgiveness. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I wasn't going to be the girl they had once known. Funny, I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. Because I distinctly remember receiving an invitation. Sarah's fiancé, still visibly shaken, took a step closer, as if trying to piece together the puzzle of my identity. His face paled even further as I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, my heels clicking against the marble floor. I could feel the tension in the room. The sudden shift as the guests began to realize something wasn't right. The silence stretched on, thick with anticipation, and I knew that this moment, the moment they finally realized who I was just the beginning. I wasn't going to beg for their approval. I wasn't going to let them see my pain. I was going to show them exactly what they had lost when they decided I wasn't worth the trouble. And as I stood there, watching their expressions shift from disdain to confusion, I realized something I had known all along. This wasn't about them. It was about me, about reclaiming the life they had tried to steal from me, about standing tall, not as the broken girl they abandoned, but as the woman they never saw coming. This was just the beginning. The silence in the room was almost suffocating. My family, my parents, my sister, stood there, frozen in their disbelief, trying to reconcile the woman I had become with the image of the helpless, discarded girl they thought they had left behind. They didn't know what to do with me, and I could see it in their eyes. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and I relished every second of it. My mother, who had once told me I was nothing more than a burden, gripped her champagne flute tightly, her fingers trembling slightly. She was trying to maintain control, but I could see the cracks. She hated being exposed, hated that I wasn't the pathetic, weak version of myself she had once cast aside. She had always been the picture of composure, a woman who prided herself on her superiority. But now, she was shaken, and it gave me a quiet sense of satisfaction. And then there was Sarah, my sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. She had always been the one who received all the praise, all the attention, and I had been the one left to fade into the background. It was as if I had never mattered. But now, as I stood before them, her composure was faltering. I could see it in the way her mouth twitched, in the way her eyes flickered nervously between me and the guests. She wasn't the perfect daughter anymore. She wasn't the flawless image they had crafted for her. I wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. The time for subtlety was over. It was time to reveal the truth, to show them just how much their perfect little world had been built on lies. I stepped forward, feeling the eyes of the room on me, and I could almost taste the anticipation in the air. The guests were watching, sensing the shift, and I could see the curiosity beginning to grow in their expressions. "Sarah," I began, my voice steady and cold. "You never finished medical school, did you?" Her eyes widened in surprise, her mouth opening and closing as if she had no idea how to respond. She had always prided herself on her academic achievements, on the image of the perfect, successful daughter, but now, I was exposing the cracks in that image. "You flunked out before you even had a chance to apply for your residency," I continued, each word calculated, each pause deliberate. "And here I am, about to ruin your perfect little day, when you can't even live up to the standards your parents set for you." Sarah's face twisted in disbelief, her skin paling as the truth hit her. Her gaze flickered nervously to her fiancé, Ron, who was still standing there, holding the paper I had handed him. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the growing sense of betrayal. The documents I had just handed him, the evidence of Sarah's failure, were about to shatter the illusion they had worked so hard to build. Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking with panic. "This is a lie. She's lying," she spat, her eyes darting between the guests and me, trying to regain control. "This isn't true. You can't believe her." But it was too late. Ron, the man she had so carefully curated as the perfect fiancé, wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes were fixed on the paper, his face contorted in disbelief as he processed what I had just revealed. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The truth had already begun to unravel everything she had built. and I could see the weight of that realization pressing down on her. The room had fallen silent. But there was one more revelation I had yet to share. My father, always the one who had been so sure of his superiority, had a secret of his own. A secret that I had spent years gathering. A secret that would destroy the facade of their perfect lives once and for all. I turned to him, my eyes locking with his. And I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes as I took a step closer. "You didn't think I knew, did you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But it was enough to send a chill through the room. The financial fraud, the embezzlement, the insurance fraud, the falsified patient records. His face went pale, and for the first time in years, I saw him struggle to maintain his composure. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words faltered. He had been caught, and he knew it. His perfect little empire was crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of the truth I had brought with me. "I've been gathering evidence for years," I continued, my tone cold and calculated. "And now it's all coming back to you. The lies, the manipulation, the crimes you thought you could get away with. It's all here, and now, you have nowhere to hide." My father's face twisted in anger, his eyes darting around the room. But it was too late. The guests were beginning to whisper, and I could see the look of fear on his face. He had always thought he could control everything, that no one would ever find out the truth. But now, as I stood there, the walls closing in on him, I knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. And I wasn't going to let them escape this time. The tension in the room was palpable. A thick, suffocating fog that seemed to press against my chest with every passing second. I stood in the eye of the storm, watching as my family unraveled before my eyes. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the one feeling small, insignificant, or lost. No, this time, it was them. And as I looked around the ballroom at the faces of my mother, father, and sister, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel before: empowerment. My father, once the towering figure who had dismissed me so easily, now seemed small. His usual air of dominance was gone, replaced by the kind of vulnerability that only came from facing the truth. The truth I had held onto for so long, waiting for this very moment. My mother, who had spent my childhood measuring me against her own impossible standards, now stood with her lips pressed tightly together, trying in vain to retain some semblance of control. But the cracks in her facade were too wide to ignore. She was frightened, and for the first time, I could see it. Sarah, still trying to hold onto her perfection, stood there with her arms crossed, her face a picture of disbelief and anger. She was floundering, unable to come up with a single convincing argument to counter the evidence I had exposed. And Ron, the man she had once called her perfect match, was no longer standing by her side. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly agape, as the truth slowly sank in. The room had fallen into complete silence. Every eye was on me, waiting, wondering what I would do next. But I had one final card to play. I reached into my clutch, pulling out a sleek black USB drive. It gleamed in the dim light, almost mocking in its simplicity. I could see the fear flash across my father's face as I held it up. And I could feel the tremor of anticipation in the air. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. The thing that would shatter everything they had worked so hard to keep hidden. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the nail in your coffin." I looked directly at my father as I spoke, watching his expression change from annoyance to panic. He had always been the one to hold everything together, to act as if he had all the power. But now, as he looked at the USB drive in my hand, I could see the terror in his eyes. He knew, deep down, that everything was about to come crashing down around him. I could feel the weight of their gaze on me as I turned toward the nearby DJ booth. I knew what would happen next. Ron would plug in the USB drive, and everything would be exposed. Every fraudulent document, every criminal act they had tried so hard to cover up, would be laid bare for all to see. As I walked over to the booth, my heels clicking against the marble floor, I could hear Sarah's voice behind me, weak and desperate. "This is all a lie. You're just trying to ruin everything." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They all knew the truth now. And no amount of lies or manipulation could change that. Ron, still holding the USB drive, took a deep breath and plugged it into the laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he clicked open the file. I could see the moment he realized what he was looking at. His face drained of color. His hand shaking as he scrolled through the files. The evidence was irrefutable. My father's medical practice, their family business. Everything was linked to insurance fraud, embezzlement, and falsified medical records. The room had gone completely still, save for the sound of Ron's heavy breathing. He looked up at Sarah, and the expression on his face was one of pure betrayal. You lied to me," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. Sarah's face contorted with panic, and she opened her mouth to speak. But no words came out. She knew there was no going back now. The truth had come out, and there was no hiding from it. The moment was electric. It was the culmination of everything I had endured, everything I had worked toward. The people who had once cast me aside, treated me like I was nothing, were now faced with the consequences of their actions. My father, his face flushed with anger and panic, tried to step forward, but his voice cracked as he spoke. "You think this is the end?" he spat. "You think you've won?" I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "Oh, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." I turned to the room, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. I knew the truth now. And so did everyone else. My family's perfect little world had been built on lies and deception. And I was the one who had torn it apart. Ron, still staring at the laptop screen, turned to Sarah with a look of disgust. "You're nothing but a fraud." His words echoed through the room, and I could see Sarah's entire world crumble around her. She had built her life on lies, on the perfect image of a woman who had it all. But now, everything was exposed. I stood there, in the middle of it all, watching as their carefully constructed facades collapsed. For the first time in my life, I felt free from the years of pain. The years of being told I wasn't enough. I wasn't the broken girl they had cast aside anymore. I was stronger than they could ever imagine. And I was finally standing in the light of my own truth. The chaos that followed was the final moment of reckoning for my family. The ballroom was filled with the sound of murmurs, gasps, and the clinking of glasses as the guests tried to process what had just happened. My parents, my sister, none of them could hide from the truth anymore. And as the dust settled, I walked away, not with anger, not with regret, but with something much more powerful, freedom. As I walked away from the wreckage of my family's carefully constructed world, I felt an overwhelming sense of release. The years of pain, the abandonment, the cruel words, they no longer had a hold on me. I had let go of everything that had once weighed me down. And now, I was free. The woman who stood at the door of that ballroom was not the same girl they had discarded all those years ago. She was stronger, wiser, and most importantly, she knew her worth. My husband, Daniel, was waiting by the doors, his eyes filled with understanding and support. He didn't need to ask if I was okay, he knew. His silent presence was everything I needed. As I reached his side, he took my hand, his touch a quiet anchor in the midst of everything. Without saying a word, we walked out of that place together, leaving behind the chaos, the betrayal, and the people who had once been my family. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around us like a welcome embrace. The city hummed around us, unaware of the storm that had just passed. I glanced at Daniel, a smile tugging at my lips. "Cake?" I asked, the weight of the evening finally beginning to lift. He raised an eyebrow, and I laughed, deep, uninhibited, and free. "Yes," I said, "let's get some cake." Because tonight wasn't about them. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my life, my power, and my future. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Thank you for following my story. If you want to hear more real-life tales and profound lessons, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the latest updates. Life has a way of teaching us lessons. And sometimes, we must fight to find our freedom.